A quiet night on Earth. The world is at peace, at least on the surface. In the neon-lit cities, people go about their lives, unaware of the cosmic horror that looms above them. Some laugh in bars, some dream in their sleep, and others gaze up at the stars, lost in the vastness of the universe. But beyond that peaceful night sky, beyond the reach of human eyes, something watches, something ancient, something merciless. At first, there were only whispers, a strange anomaly detected in deep space, faint gravitational distortions, barely noticeable, as if the fabric of reality itself was bending. Astronomers dismissed it, at first, an error in calculations, a trick of the instruments. But then, the anomalies grew stronger. Telescopes detected entire regions of stars, vanishing, not dying, not collapsing into black holes, just disappearing. Like something was consuming the light itself. Governments scrambled in secret. Superpowers whispered behind closed doors, sharing classified intelligence that all pointed to the same chilling conclusion. Something was approaching. Something vast. Something powerful enough to silence the stars. Then, the sky ripped open. Thunderous boom echoed across the planet, shaking the foundations of civilization itself. The world watched in terror as colossal alien warships descended from the heavens. Each one was an impossibility. A floating fortress, miles long, covered in jagged metallic plating that seemed to shift and pulse like a living organism. They weren't just ships. They were apex predators of the cosmos, and humanity was their prey. The invaders had no intention of making contact, no offer of peace, no diplomatic envoy. Their first act was an execution. Beams of violet energy lanced down from their warships, striking Earth's surface with surgical precision. Entire cities vanished in an instant. Paris, New Delhi, Buenos Aires, Cairo, wiped from existence. In a matter of minutes, billions of lives were reduced to nothing more than dust floating in the wind. The world descended into chaos. Communications were jammed. Military response systems were crippled before they could even be activated. Humanity, despite all its advancements, appeared utterly helpless. The invaders believed it was over. They thought Earth would fall without a fight, just like so many other worlds they had conquered before. They had no idea what was coming. For decades, humanity had prepared for the unthinkable. In the shadows, secret projects had pushed the boundaries of science. Quantum shields, hypersonic rail cannons, AI-driven war machines. The world's greatest minds had created defenses so advanced that even Earth's own governments barely understood them. Humanity had always feared an invasion. But what the aliens didn't know was that Earth wasn't just ready to defend itself. Earth was ready to retaliate. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The first real battle didn't happen in the skies. It happened in space. The aliens had no idea that Earth had hidden weapons of its own beyond the atmosphere. Massive orbital platforms, disguised as derelict satellites, suddenly came to life. With silent fury, they unleashed beams of concentrated energy that burned through alien hulls like paper. These weren't conventional weapons. These were the products of decades of research in quantum mechanics and exotic particle physics. The alien ships, for the first time in their species' history, hesitated. Then the second phase began. From deep beneath the ocean, concealed within the crushing depths where no satellite or radar could detect them, Earth's black-budget warships rose like leviathans from the abyss. These weren't ordinary vessels. They were constructed with materials never before seen, powered by reactors that defied the known laws of physics. They were faster, deadlier, and far more advanced than anything the invaders had prepared for. The first retaliation strike was swift. From high orbit, the alien fleet watched as Earth's atmosphere lit up. Massive hypersonic missiles launched from hidden silos around the globe, breaking through the mesosphere at unbelievable speeds. These weren't nuclear warheads. They were worse. Each carried an experimental payload, plasma-based kinetic detonators designed to unleash miniature sunbursts upon impact. The first alien dreadnought never had a chance. The moment the missile collided, a blinding explosion erupted in space, tearing through its hull, reducing it to a cloud of vaporized metal and plasma. Then the second ship fell. Then the third. Panic. For the first time in their long, brutal history of conquest, the invaders experienced fear. They had expected to slaughter a primitive species. Instead, they had awakened something far worse than they ever imagined. But humanity had one final surprise waiting for them. Deep beneath the ice of Antarctica, in a location so secretive that only a handful of humans knew of its existence, the real weapon lay dormant. A project so classified, so devastating, that not even Earth's own leaders were fully aware of its capabilities. And when the moment was right, a single silent signal was sent, and the countdown began. The countdown began. In a facility hidden, deep beneath the Antarctic ice, a sequence of events had been set in motion. Events that would change the fate of the battle in an instant. A structure that had remained dormant for decades now pulsed with life, its ancient mechanisms humming with an almost sentient awareness. This wasn't just a military base. It was Earth's last line of defense. High above, the alien invaders scrambled to adjust their strategy. Their calculations had been wrong. The species they thought was fragile, primitive, was nothing short of a technological anomaly. Their war doctrine, crafted over thousands of years and honed through the conquest of hundreds of civilizations, was failing. They had studied biological scans of humans, dissected their radio signals, analyzed their crude pre-warp technology, and had come to the same conclusion every time. Humanity was insignificant. And yet, in less than an hour, their once mighty fleet was in tatters. The first of their dreadnoughts had been annihilated by hyper-accelerated plasma detonations. Their battleships, designed to withstand the siege of entire planetary systems, had proven vulnerable to Earth's experimental orbital defense weapons. Their swarmer drones, biomechanical nightmares that had reduced entire species to extinction, were shredded mid-air before they even reached the ground. Panic spread through the alien fleet like wildfire. Their warships, massive behemoths that had never faced an equal opponent, were now bleeding fire and metal. Their once impenetrable hulls torn open by attacks they didn't understand. The very idea that a non-spacefaring civilization could mount such a devastating counterattack was beyond their comprehension. But what came next? It broke them. From deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the final weapon was about to be unleashed. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't a fleet of warships. It wasn't even a planetary shield or a superweapon in the traditional sense. It was something far more terrifying. Earth had always been at a disadvantage in the cosmic game of war. No hyperdrives. No interstellar colonies. No empire stretching across the stars. But what humanity lacked in reach, it compensated for in ingenuity. Decades ago, long before the invasion, Earth's greatest minds had been working on a different kind of weapon. One that didn't just destroy an enemy fleet, but erased them from existence. The project had many names. Black Veil, the Eclipse Protocol, Omega Initiative, but its true designation was far simpler: the Event Horizon device. At exactly 0 hour, the countdown reached its final seconds. Deep within the underground facility, a chamber, reinforced with exotic alloys never before seen in conventional engineering, began to glow. Inside, a swirling mass of pure energy pulsated violently, bound by forces so extreme that reality itself seemed to bend and warp around it. This was not a bomb. It was not a mere explosion. It was the weaponization of something far more dangerous than raw firepower. A controlled black hole. Designed not to consume planets or devour stars, but to target and erase anything that entered its event horizon, stripping matter apart at a subatomic level, ensuring that nothing, not debris, not radiation, not even memories of what had been destroyed, remained. The signal was sent. The facility unleashed the Event Horizon device, and at that moment, the battlefield changed forever. High above Earth, the alien fleet detected the disturbance instantly. Their advanced sensors picked up readings that defied the known laws of physics. Gravitational distortions spiked violently, Space itself seemed to ripple, and then, nothing. One by one, their ships began to vanish, not destroyed, not vaporized, not shattered into debris, just gone, as if they had never existed. Entire formations of warships, each the size of floating cities, simply ceased to be. Their commanders had no time to react, no time to strategize, no time to retreat. The destruction was not explosive, it was erasure. They had witnessed planets burn to ashes before. They had seen supernovae obliterate entire star systems, but never had they seen a weapon that simply deleted an entire fleet from reality itself. The few remaining ships, those that had managed to escape the device's radius, finally did what they had never done in their species' history. They fled, but Earth wasn't done yet. The remaining warships were faster than anything humanity had in conventional space travel. Their hyperluminous drives were already charging, preparing to catapult them across the stars and away from the nightmare they had unknowingly awakened. But humanity had been studying them from the moment they arrived. A second counterstrike was already in motion. From the shadows of Earth's dark side, hidden among the planetary defense grid, an array of quantum entanglement disruptors activated. These weren't weapons in the traditional sense. They didn't fire missiles or beams. Instead, they did something much more sinister. They severed the invaders' connection to space itself. Hyperdrives failed. Escape trajectories collapsed. The very fabric of space-time around the remaining ships solidified, trapping them in the solar system with no way out. The final message was sent, broadcast on every frequency, translated into every possible alien dialect. You came to conquer, but you were never conquerors. You were prey. You just didn't know it yet. Silence. The remaining alien vessels, crippled, leaderless, and trapped, had no options left. Their best warriors, their greatest ships, all gone. Their empire, once so certain in its domination of the cosmos, now faced a reality they had never considered possible. They had invaded Earth, thinking it was just another conquest. Instead, they had walked into the abyss itself. But the war wasn't over yet, because humanity had one final decision to make. Did they let the surviving invaders crawl back to their empire, to spread the story of what happened here? Or did they finish the job, to be continued? The remaining alien warships drifted in the void, paralyzed. Their sleek obsidian hulls, once the pride of an empire that had crushed civilizations without resistance, were now little more than adrift wrecks. The humans had done the unthinkable, not just repelled the invasion, but unraveled the very core of the invaders' dominance. For the first time in their species' long and brutal history, they were helpless. Inside the command bridge of the last Dreadnought-class battleship, the alien High Lord, once the orchestrator of planetary subjugations, once feared across the Orion Arm, was now a caged animal. His mind, genetically sharpened for strategic perfection, could not comprehend what had happened. The humans were not supposed to have this kind of power. They were supposed to be primitives. They were supposed to beg. They were supposed to be extinct, and yet, here they were, standing on the precipice of something far more terrifying than a mere military victory. The annihilation of their fleet was not just an act of war. It was a message, a declaration. Humanity was not just a civilization. It was an anomaly, a force of nature that defied every known law of conquest. But even now, as the final remnants of the alien fleet floated in eerie silence, their commanders refused to believe that they had been truly defeated. There had to be a way out. There had to be an explanation, surely. Humanity could not possibly match their empire's true strength. Surely, this was just a fluke. A terrifying realization crept through the minds of the surviving aliens. Their empire had always believed in overwhelming force, in deploying more ships, more soldiers, more firepower than any enemy could withstand. If they returned to their homeworld with news of this defeat, what would happen? Would the overlords, the architects of their empire's endless war, send another invasion? Would they gather an armada the size of a star cluster, prepared to reduce Earth to a dead rock? That was the obvious answer, the logical answer. But then another thought emerged, one that sent cold fear into their very bones. What if their empire wasn't ready? What if the humans had more weapons? What if the Event Horizon device was just the beginning? The war councils of their species had always believed that technological progress was predictable, that every civilization followed a natural trajectory of advancement. But humanity had leaped forward in ways that defied reason. Even without hyperdrives, even without interstellar colonies, even trapped in their own solar system. Humanity had just erased a fleet from existence. And the worst part? They hadn't even sent a single ship into battle. The war had been fought and won from Earth itself. No massive armadas, no planetary invasions, no grand space battles. Just brilliant minds, hidden weapons, and technology. The invaders didn't even have words. For this was not just a victory, it was a warning. The alien survivors sent out an emergency broadcast. One final desperate attempt to reach their empire before the humans decided to end them completely. A distress call, a plea for reinforcements. But nothing came. The quantum entanglement, disruptors, still active in the darkness of space, ensured that no messages could reach beyond the system. The surviving alien commanders were not just stranded, they were alone. And then, for the first time since the war had begun, humanity spoke to them. A transmission, pure, precise, and unmistakable, was delivered straight into their remaining fleet. It did not come in the form of a threat. It did not demand surrender. It was a question. Who sent you? The High Lord's body stiffened. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was suffocating. Humanity wasn't gloating. They weren't celebrating. They were investigating. And suddenly, it all made sense. The humans didn't just see this as a war. They saw it as an experiment. They had watched the invasion unfold with clinical precision. They had allowed the aliens to land on Earth, to deploy their weapons, to believe they had the upper hand. Why? Because they wanted to see what their enemies were truly capable of. And when they had gathered enough information, when they had mapped out every weakness, every strength, every flaw in the invaders' entire doctrine, they had erased them, like a scientist testing a hypothesis. The High Lord felt something alien creep into his mind, something he had never felt before. Terror. He had conquered dozens of species. He had burned worlds that refused to bow. But none of them had ever fought like this. None of them had treated war like a puzzle to be solved. None of them had studied their enemies like prey. With shaking hands, he responded. Not with words, but by transmitting the location of his homeworld. A desperate act. A futile attempt to prove that his species was still strong, that they still had the means to retaliate. The transmission was sent. And then, without a single shot being fired, the remaining alien ships were wiped from existence. Gone. Earth's last message to their empire was simple. We are coming. And, for the first time in the history of the universe, a species that had once ruled the stars felt fear. The void of space was silent once more. The wreckage of the once mighty alien fleet, an armada that had shattered countless civilizations before, now drifted as little more than dust and debris, silent echoes of a doomed conquest. The High Lord's desperate transmission had been sent carrying the coordinates of his homeworld, a final act of defiance, or perhaps a plea for mercy. But humanity did not deal in mercy. Back on Earth, in a facility hidden beneath kilometers of reinforced alloy and quantum-shielded bunkers, a group of minds beyond ordinary human comprehension observed the battlefield, with eerie detachment. Scientists, tacticians, and engineers, men and women who had orchestrated the impossible, studied the results of their latest experiment. Humanity had never been the strongest, never the fastest, never the most advanced, but they had something no other species had ever possessed. They had the ability to adapt at a speed that defied reason. The alien invasion had never been a war. It had been a calculated trap. The moment the first enemy warships entered the solar system, Earth's defense networks had gone dark, not from destruction, but by design. The aliens had believed they had crippled humanity's infrastructure. In reality, humanity had allowed them to think so, forcing them to deploy their full force, forcing them to reveal their technology, their strategies, their weaknesses. The Invaders had thought themselves superior. But superiority meant nothing in the face of something that could evolve faster than it could be destroyed. The Event Horizon device had been only the beginning. While the remnants of the alien fleet floated, lifeless in space, the real battle had already shifted to a new front. The silent war begins far beyond the asteroid belt, within a hidden research station orbiting Jupiter's frozen moon. Ganymede, Earth's most secretive project, was about to change everything. The station, officially classified as a deep space monitoring facility, was in reality the birthplace of humanity's most dangerous innovation. A weapon that was neither a missile nor a fleet of warships. A weapon that no empire could ever see coming. In the depths of the station, sealed behind layers of security that even quantum decryption could not breach, the project's lead scientist, Dr. Elias Roth, stood before a console glowing with symbols that no human should have ever been able to decipher. But they had. Because the moment the High Lord's distress signal had been sent, humanity had done something unprecedented. They had hijacked the transmission. Not just received it, decoded it. Not just decoded it, understood it. In a matter of hours, human scientists had broken down the alien language, mapped their encryption, and decrypted the entire strategic infrastructure of the invaders' empire. They now had access to everything: supply lines, fleet movements, military, strongholds, and most importantly, their homeworld's location. But raw information was not enough. Humanity did not simply want revenge, they wanted control. Roth turned to his team. Run the simulation again. A holographic projection ignited above the control panel. The display showed the alien homeworld, a planet far older and larger than Earth, surrounded by fortress moons, planetary defense networks, and an armada that made the invasion fleet look like a scouting party. Billions of enemy soldiers, thousands of dreadnoughts, a force that should have been unstoppable. And yet, Roth was calm. Because the simulation had already proven the inevitable outcome. It didn't matter how many ships they had. It didn't matter how many soldiers they could deploy. Because humanity had already won. The screen flickered. A new projection appeared. An infiltration model, a virus, not biological, not digital. Something far worse, a self-replicating sequence, crafted from the very language of the alien species itself. A weapon that did not attack their bodies, nor their machines, but their minds. The virus had been carefully constructed using the very same transmission that the High Lord had sent in desperation. It was designed to embed itself into their neural networks, into the very structure of their cognitive processing. The moment the message reached the alien homeworld, the war would be over, because the virus would not cripple their empire. It would rewrite it. Every ship, every soldier, every command structure, every mind. Humanity would not need to fire a single shot, because by the time the invaders realized what had happened, they would already be human. Roth exhaled slowly. Send it. A single signal was launched into the void. A whisper of data, insignificant, almost invisible. But it carried with it the weight of an entire species' vengeance. The alien homeworld would never even know what had hit them. Not until it was too late. For the first time in the history of the universe, an empire was not conquered by force, it was conquered by thought. By the time the High Lord's message was fully received by his own people, the virus had already rewritten their understanding of reality. Their warships, still stationed around their home planet, turned on one another, not in combat, but in confusion. Their commanders suddenly questioned their orders. Their soldiers began to feel emotions they had never known before: doubt, guilt, remorse. And then, the first act of rebellion in their species' history occurred. Single warship, once an unthinking instrument of conquest, opened fire on its own fleet. A planetary civil war ignited in real time. Humanity did not invade their homeworld. They did not conquer it. They allowed them to destroy themselves. And when the dust settled, when the fires of war had burned down the last remnants of their old empire, humanity was waiting, not as conquerors, but as their new gods. The war had been won before it even began. The virus had done its work in ways even humanity's most brilliant minds had not fully anticipated. It had been designed to be subtle, undetectable at first, embedding itself within the neural frameworks of the alien species. The moment their homeworld received the High Lord's desperate transmission, the virus had activated, rewiring thought, processes, reshaping beliefs, and dissolving the rigid obedience that had bound their empire for centuries. But the collapse of an empire was never instantaneous. Even as the infected minds began to unravel, there were those who resisted. Deep within the alien homeworld, Zirath Prime, a planet of towering citadels, sprawling industrial megacities, and an atmosphere thick with the acrid scent of war-forged metal, the Supreme War Council gathered. The High Lord's distress signal had barely finished transmitting before a crisis summit was convened. The Zirathian species had ruled through discipline and hierarchy. Emotions such as compassion, hesitation, and self-doubt were alien to them, until now. "Explain this," Supreme Executor Vatheris growled, his mandibles twitching in frustration as he gazed at the hollow projection of his fleet. "Why are our ships standing down? Why are our commanders questioning orders?" His generals hesitated. That, in itself, was unthinkable. Hesitation was weakness. Weakness was death. One of the officers, a veteran of countless planetary conquests, finally spoke. "Sir, something is affecting our people. It is spreading through the command network, but not like a cyber attack. Our firewalls remain intact. There is no external intrusion." Vatheris bared his fangs. "Then what?" The room fell into silence. It was a question no one could answer. A mind war. Unlike any other, the Supreme Council acted with urgency, deploying countermeasures that had crushed rebellions in the past. Mass purges of compromised officers were carried out. Any commanders who exhibited hesitation were executed on the spot. But it wasn't enough. For every commander they killed, 3 more emerged with the same affliction. The virus did not merely rewrite their minds. It seeded ideas, dangerous, corrosive thoughts that had never existed within their species. What if our empire is not supreme? What if we are wrong? What if there is another way? The Zirathian species had never questioned authority. But now, an epidemic of doubt was spreading faster than their most lethal bioweapons. Entire battalions went rogue. Warships turned on each other. The once indomitable military juggernaut of the Zirathian Empire fractured from within, and all of it had been engineered by a species they had dismissed as nothing more than primitive savages. Humanity's watchful. Eye on Earth, humanity's greatest minds watched it all unfold in real time. In a war room hidden beneath the surface of Luna Base, analysts and strategists studied the breakdown of the Zirathian hierarchy. Massive holographic displays projected the chaos gripping Zirath Prime. Citywide riots, entire fleets in rebellion, the military's desperate and failing attempts to regain control. Standing at the center of it all was General Elias Monroe, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Coalition. He had seen the moment the High Lord's fleet had been annihilated. He had given the order to unleash the mind virus, and now he was watching an empire burn itself to the ground. A young officer approached him. "Sir, should we prepare a strike force?" Monroe smirked. "A strike force? No, that would be pointless." The officer hesitated. "But they're vulnerable. This is the perfect time to invade." Monroe chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't understand. We already invaded. We didn't need soldiers. We didn't need warships. We sent a single whisper, and it's turning their entire civilization inside out." He gestured toward the screen. "They'll destroy themselves, because we gave them something more powerful than any weapon." The officer frowned. "What's that, sir?" Monroe's gaze remained fixed on the screen, where a Zirathian dreadnought was firing upon its own planetary command center. A choice. The final collapse. It took less than a Zirathian solar cycle, about 20 days in human time, for the Empire to reach the breaking point. Entire planetary governors defected. Military leaders abandoned their posts. The Emperor himself, a being once considered a god-king, issued a desperate call for unity. No one listened. The Zirathians, once bound by absolute obedience, now questioned everything. And the moment an empire starts questioning itself, it ceases to be an empire. The final battle of the war was not fought with plasma cannons or planetary bombardments. It was fought in the minds of the Zarathian people, and it was a battle they had already lost. The Supreme Executor, Vatheris, watched as his capital city, once the pinnacle of their civilization, descended into anarchy. A once proud fleet, built over thousands of years, turned to ashes in orbit. For the first time in his life, he felt something truly alien to him: despair. A deep, soul-crushing realization settled in his mind. The war was over. Not because they had been defeated, but because they had become something else. The virus had not simply destroyed their empire. It had rewritten their identity. They were no longer the same species, and that terrified them more than any battle ever had. Humanity's new throne back on Earth, Monroe stood at the center of the war room, watching the last transmissions from Zirath Prime. There was no longer an empire. The Zarathians who had once ruled with an iron grip were now leaderless, aimless, divided. He turned to his officers. "Send the message." The communications officer nodded, transmitting a final statement to the remnants of the Zarathian people. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a declaration of victory. It was something far worse: a choice. Humanity had not come to destroy them. They had come to reshape them. They could choose to resist, fight against the tide, and watch what remained of their civilization dissolve into nothing. Or they could accept what they had become. Not conquerors, not tyrants, but something else, something more. And if they did, humanity would welcome them. Not as enemies, but as brothers. The transmission was sent. A single moment that would define the fate of an entire species. And as the last embers of the old Zarathian Empire faded into the darkness of the void, humanity took its place as the new rulers of the stars. The war was over, and humanity had won without firing a single shot. For the first time in recorded history, an empire had collapsed not from external conquest, but from the unraveling of its very identity. The Zarathian species, once the absolute masters of war, had been undone by something more profound than any weapon, an idea. But victory was not the end. It was merely the beginning. As the dust settled over the ruins of the Zarathian Empire, the true challenge emerged. What would humanity do next? Would they seize the remnants of the fallen empire, claiming dominion over the Zarathian homeworld and its scattered colonies? Would they step into the power vacuum left behind, guiding the shattered species toward a new future? Or would they simply watch, leaving their former enemy to either rebuild or vanish into obscurity? The decision would shape the course of the galaxy, a broken empire's final breath. The fall of Zirath Prime sent shockwaves across the stars. The once mighty war machine of the Zarathians, which had ruled with an iron grip for thousands of cycles, was now splintered into warring factions, rogue admirals, and isolated planetary governors, all scrambling for control. Civil wars erupted across former imperial worlds. Old grievances, suppressed for centuries by the brutal efficiency of the empire, now exploded into violent conflict. But the virus had not just rewritten their leaders. It had rewritten their people. Across the empire's core worlds, an awakening was taking place. For generations, Zarathians had obeyed without question. Now, for the first time, they hesitated. Some commanders refused to execute purges. Soldiers began questioning their orders. Entire garrisons abandoned their posts, and on the streets of Zirath Prime, among the ruins of a once mighty capital, a new generation of Zarathians was beginning to think for themselves. For some, it was terrifying. For others, it was liberating. The empire had been built on absolute control, and now that control was gone. For the first time, the Zarathian species faced a future they could not predict. The human dilemma. Humanity's leaders stood at a crossroads. The war had been won without firing a single shot, but the consequences of victory were far-reaching. In a high-security meeting on Luna Base, Earth's greatest minds debated the path forward. "The Zarathians are no longer a threat," Admiral Henshaw stated, leaning over the holographic display. "They're tearing themselves apart. Their fleets are leaderless. Their command structure is shattered. Their entire species is paralyzed by self-doubt. General Elias Monroe nodded but remained silent. Dr. Rachel Voss, one of the architects of the mind virus, studied the data. It's more than that, she said. They're evolving. They're experiencing something no Zerathian has ever felt before. Free will. A tense silence filled the room. Then they're dangerous, a defense minister said, unstable. If they learn to adapt, they could rise again, stronger than before. Voss shook her head. Or they could become something else entirely. Something new. Monroe finally spoke. That's the real question, isn't it? He gestured to the shifting power dynamics displayed on the hologram. Zerathian warlords battling for control, planets declaring independence, entire fleets choosing to abandon war altogether. He turned to his advisors. We didn't just defeat them. We changed them. Now we have to decide. Do we guide them, or do we leave them to their fate? The message that changed everything. Before humanity could reach a consensus, something unexpected happened. A transmission was received from Zerath Prime. Not a distress signal, not a declaration of surrender. A request. It came from a Zerathian leader, one of the few remaining high-ranking officials who had not been assassinated or overthrown. His name was Vatheris, once a ruthless executor of the Empire's will. Now, he was something else. His message was simple, but its implications were profound. We seek an audience, not as conquerors, not as enemies, but as equals. The Gia war room fell silent. For the first time in history, a Zerathian was not demanding. He was asking. Humanity had given them a choice. And now, they were choosing. First contact. Again, a diplomatic envoy was assembled. Humanity, despite having claimed victory, understood that what came next would define their place in the galaxy. Would they rule with the same iron fist as the Zerathians once had? Or would they offer something greater? Something no empire had ever given before. Monroe, chosen as the head of the delegation, boarded the UNS Triumph, a state-of-the-art diplomatic vessel, and set course for Zerath Prime. The journey took only a few days, but in those few days, history itself seemed to shift. When the Triumph finally arrived, the sight that awaited them was staggering. Zerath Prime, once a world of rigid order and absolute control, was changing before their very eyes. Statues of former emperors had been torn down. Propaganda banners had been burned. In their place, new symbols were rising, not of war, but of something unfamiliar. Hope. In the heart of the capital, Monroe stepped out onto the landing platform. Awaiting him was Vatheris, standing at the head of a newly assembled governing council. His once imposing armor was gone, replaced with a simple tunic. There were no guards, no soldiers, only leaders, seeking a new path. Vatheris met Monroe's gaze. For centuries, we believed strength was absolute, he said. That to rule was to conquer. That to exist was to dominate. He gestured to the city behind him. We see now that we were wrong. A long pause. Monroe crossed his arms. So what now? Vatheris took a deep breath. We wish to learn. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of an empire's fall and the birth of something new. Humanity's greatest victory, what followed was not a treaty, nor a formal surrender. It was something unprecedented in galactic history. A partnership. The Zerathians, once the most feared conquerors in the stars, were now students, and humanity, the species they had once sought to exterminate, had become their teachers. For the first time, an empire had not been replaced by another empire. It had evolved into something else. Monroe turned to Vatheris and extended his hand. For a brief moment, the Zerathian hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. A single gesture. A single moment. The war was over, and the future had just begun. The war had ended, but the true challenge was only beginning. Across the remnants of the Zerathian Empire, a new order was struggling to be born. What had once been an unstoppable war machine had fractured into countless factions, each fighting for control, each desperate to define what it meant to be. Zerathian in a galaxy where their old ways no longer held power. Some warlords still clung to the past, attempting to rebuild the empire by force. But their ranks were thinning. Their soldiers no longer obeyed blindly. The virus had not merely disrupted the Empire's leadership, it had changed the fundamental nature of its people. For the first time in their history, Zerathians could question, doubt, and choose. The Empire had relied on absolute obedience, but with that obedience shattered, the very foundation of Zerathian civilization had crumbled. Humanity had not just won a war, they had reshaped an entire species. Vatheris, the former executor of the Empire's will, had become something else entirely. He had seen what others refused to acknowledge, that the old ways were not merely broken, they had been a lie from the very beginning. He had watched as his own people turned against their former leaders, not out of rebellion, but out of an awakening. The Zerathians had always believed that strength was absolute, that domination was the only path to survival. But now they faced a reality that defied everything they had been taught. They had been defeated, not by superior firepower, not by a greater military, but by an idea. And in that defeat, they had found something they had never known before: freedom. Vatheris understood that the war had been lost the moment the virus had taken hold. What he did not expect was that, in losing, his people had gained something greater than they had ever possessed. The warlords who still clung to the past were already doomed. They were fighting for a version of the Empire that no longer existed, leading armies of soldiers who no longer wished to fight. Some had defected to independent factions, seeking to carve out their own futures. Others had abandoned their posts entirely, choosing exile over war. Entire fleets had simply vanished, their captains unwilling to serve an empire that no longer held meaning. But there were those, like Vatheris, who saw an opportunity. If the Zerathians were to survive, they needed to change. And the only ones who could show them how were the very people they had once sought to annihilate. Monroe and his delegation had come not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous. Witnesses to the birth of a new civilization. The Zerathians were no longer an empire, but they were not yet a republic. They were something in between, caught in the fragile space between destruction and rebirth. It was a moment unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity could have crushed the Zerathians completely, could have wiped them from history as so many species had been erased before them. But instead, they had chosen a different path. They had chosen to guide. The first meetings were tense. There was no trust, only the fragile beginnings of understanding. Vatheris spoke not as a ruler, but as a representative of a people searching for purpose. Monroe listened, not as a victor, but as an equal. The discussions lasted for days, stretching long into the nights beneath the shattered skyline of Zirath Prime. There were arguments, accusations, moments of anger. But there was also something else: progress. For the first time in their history, Zerathians and humans sat at the same table, not as enemies, but as something more complicated. Humanity had shown them a future beyond war, and now they had to decide if they were willing to embrace it. There were those who resisted, those who believed that the only path forward was one of conquest. But their numbers dwindled with each passing day. The warlords found themselves alone, abandoned by soldiers who no longer wished to fight, by citizens who no longer wished to obey. The old ways were dying, and those who clung to them were being left behind. In the end, the transformation was not immediate. Change never is. But the seeds had been planted. What had once been an empire of war was becoming something new, something uncertain, something filled with possibilities. The Zerathians would never be the same, but perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Humanity had not just erased their fleet, they had erased their very concept of war. They had broken the cycle of conquest and destruction that had defined the galaxy for so long. As Monroe and his delegation departed, the future remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The war that had begun with the invasion of Earth had ended with the fall of an empire. But its true legacy had only just begun. Humanity had proven that there was another way. And for the first time in history, even the Zerathians had begun to believe it. If the war had taught them anything, it was that the greatest power in the universe was not found in fleets or weapons, but in the ability to change. And in that, humanity had won something far greater than any battle. They had won the future. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. What do you think? Was this the greatest victory in human history, or just the beginning of something even bigger? Let us know in the comments below.